This evening, we're going to spend, of course, some time in conversation with Anna, and then I'll get out of the way and let Anna speak to us from a collection of excerpts of her work. And then we'll have some time at the end of the evening for some Q&A. But I'd love to perhaps start with some broad questions, and then maybe we can get a little deeper. One of them is this nomer of a project that follows your work over the years, or has been following it, which is On the Road, A Search for American Character. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit to what that is, how it started, and how it continues.
So, thank you for your very nice introduction. So I'm an Americanist. Mm-hmm. That is to say, I've always been very interested in first of all, the geographic span of the country. When I was 21, I left home, and I went across country with a group of friends, much to my parents' dismay, and stopped at the vanished frontier, California. And it was an amazing experience to have left my world. Mm-hmm. Brilliant Edward P. Jones wrote a novel, Pulitzer Prize winning novel called The Known World, actually about a black man who owned slaves. But one of the other successes of the book is to cause us to think about how we live in our known worlds. Mm. And I grew up with very, 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 very kind black people, Negro people they were called, educated, wonderful people. And I could have had a very happy and more, I think, organized life if I had stayed in that known world, but I didn't. And maybe my desire to make On the Road came from a longing to express all of the many emotions and feelings I had in the times that I actually crossed the land of the country. And then I had a life-changing experience when I studied how to speak Shakespeare, and a life-changing experience in my classical training, which made me long for kind of a virtuosity, to want to be a virtuoso, but psychological realism doesn't really require that unless you get to perform in a lot of plays. And, you know, I had bit parts, and I wasn't getting a workout. So I decided to create a project that would give me an intellectual, human, and a technical workout. And that is definitely what this does. And I love people and I love ideas. And so to begin in the late 70s taking my tape recorder with the idea that I would get to know American trout fishermen and pig farmers and bull riders and people in housing projects and people down in New Orleans and people in Maine and all of that. And then I had made 13 of these before I did my race plays. Oh, wow. And so actually I got known because of the race work I did, but I had been working this way for some time and had already made 13 of them.
And of course, the race work that Anna refers to are particularly the two plays, Twilight and Fires in the Mirror. Fires in the Mirror, of course, documenting a race riot in New York, and Twilight documenting a similar conversation in Los Angeles. I mean, the bicoastal nature of those, I think, could not have covered that conversation in the United States in a bigger way. When that project started, this idea of traveling and really hearing people's stories, was the idea of having a tape recorder, tape recording these conversations and then performing them. Was that something that was there from the inception, or was it about recording them and then I'll see what I do?
Well, you know, it evolved because the Shakespeare part of it was, you know, all of us are in awe of Shakespeare, you know, and schooling increases that awe for many reasons. My awe was specifically because identity could be found by simply tracking the music and the rhythm of the verse. You know, it didn't, I thought about how, and now I understand it's even deeper. My Shakespeare teacher who taught me, two people changed my life. One taught me about scansion and dynamics, that is rhythm, and the other one taught me about the images in Shakespeare. And I had a wonderful reunion with him a couple of months ago. I went to speak at a college where he now teaches, and he is now looking at Erasmus to bring even more understanding into how Shakespeare was influenced by Erasmus, and that ability to convince is what was making characters come alive. But there was something about all of that rhythm in the language that I wanted to know how that happened. How is it that a rhythm could conjure a character? And I read Native American poetry, and I read the Psalms and the Bible, and became obsessed with it and spent every waking hour trying to understand it. And then I thought, well, what if I could get people to talk to me, and if I studied the rhythms, would I know more about who they are than just by what they were saying? So there was that. And, you know, and then along the way when you're trying to solve a problem, I always say I think education should be about your questions, not your answers. That you should be going to school to find out the question that you want to answer in life. So I want to know about identity. And then, you know, along the way, I studied with a wonderful teacher in New York, Wynn Handman, who would give you Studs Terkel's book Working if he couldn't think of anything else for you to do. Everyone hated getting that because it was like, well, you know, I'm not worthy of a better assignment. But I loved the Working. Studs Terkel is another great American figure, born in 1912. We lost him just a couple of years ago. Great journalist. And I thought, well, he's interviewing real people, making a book out of it. What if I went another step further and acted out these interviews?
And it's fascinating, I have to say, to hear someone who's identified with a kind of acrobatic relationship to contemporary language cite Shakespeare as a source. That to me is really exciting because...
Well, you know, Shakespeare was, as far as I was concerned, you know, if you looked at the medieval poetry and then you looked at Shakespeare, you said, well, man, I mean, he's really a jazz musician, is what he was.
Yeah.
He was breaking form.
Yeah.
We think of it as this classic. And then I read this profile of Miles Davis in the New York Times, and he had a classical training. So I thought, well, if you want to do something innovative, it's kind of old-fashioned what I'm saying, I suppose, but I thought, if you want to do something different, then why don't you start with the vocabulary that everybody understands? So I cherished my classical training. And also, it was the only place in my 3-year training where I was getting a workout. I wasn't getting a workout in psychological realism. By that, I mean naturalistic stuff. I mean, it was just a gamble, this idea that, you know, I can find every human being inside of myself. I don't agree. I thought it was a spiritual dead end.
Right.
And I saw my acting classes, as I got more sophisticated, the advanced classes were more and more like psychotherapy. And so I became less interested in that.
Versus the notion of placing someone who seems so far from you and then the workout of
trying to
inhabiting
get
them.
to the other.
Yeah.
And also the classical training kept offering more challenges.
Sure.
The work got more and more intellectually sophisticated. But the other work became more and more about your own anxieties, your own obsessions, your own pathology. And I was interested in mythology, not pathology.
That's often confused by by theater makers. I think you know, in hearing tonight's the nomer for the evening is the magic of words, and I always think there's something to be learned about how whenever something gives a title or something. So in hearing you address words and Shakespeare and the notion of rhythm, for me one of the linchpins of your work, and I wonder if you could speak to it a bit, is actually the idea of before all those words can enter your body and your mouth, there's a key step which is the idea of listening, and I think in a way, more than anyone that I know, this question of listening is really put to the test in your work, which is I feel that for your work to be potent and successful, there has to be such an incredible ability to listen and to engage actively in that. I don't know if there's anything you could speak to in terms of how that was developed, or if it's something that you showed up to this world with, or the idea of listening.
Well, first I want to say just one quick thing about the magic of words. You know, that goes way beyond the theater, of course. Today, I got a chance for the first time. I don't know if he would allow this in general, but I had this wonderful opportunity to sit in on President John Sexton's class today, working with these wonderful Sheikh Mohammed scholars who I've had a chance to meet, twice now, 2 different classes, and it was so exciting to watch them struggle through really 2 sentences that are a part of American law. And I think I would be saying them wrong. I don't know if anybody can say exactly the sentence. Congress shall make no law, and then what is it that, what's next? I see some of the scholars here. Congress shall make no law, what is it? Huh? No, because it's so specific, the words. I know they are here. I saw them walk in. Yes,
John.
John.
Respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof.
Right. And so the word they worked on today was religion, because John has taken that to task in the past. But you also left me hanging. I had to leave a little early to go get an interview. The word no. But the way that the Supreme Court keeps going back to original words to justify how we live. So we trust and mistrust words. And we can break someone's heart with a word. There are words that are not allowed to be said in certain cultures. So the magic of words is really the foundation of our reality. And in many different fields, not just in what you and I do. Listening, well, I liked to listen when I was a girl. There was a lady next door who weighed about 450 pounds, Miss Johnson, and she would always call me over to scratch her back and then go down the street and buy her fat back. And,
which is a fatty.
It's more than bacon. It's really fat.
Wow.
And I would just be so pleased to hear stories that she told. And I was very close to my paternal grandfather, and to who was, had like an 8th grade education, and my maternal grandmother. And so I listened to stories as a girl. I liked listening to people.
And as this listening and this choosing of words, you just alluded to the fact that the potency of words certainly exists in other forms. Was there a very early on a very logical connection for you in manifesting this in the theater versus any other medium? I mean, clearly you do live in other mediums, and by that I mean the written word and recorded. But there was something about these voices.
Well, I hadn't thought about being in the theater. I wanted to be a psychiatrist, so that would have. And then I saw West Side Story, and it's not that I saw West Side Story and thought, oh my God, I have to be an actress. I went to see the movie West Side Story, and I came home and I cried for a couple of days and couldn't stop crying. So my mother said, forget it, that's it, you can't be a psychiatrist, you're too sensitive, that's it. So, I mean, how to destroy, I could have been a scientist and I became a clown. She really, in that way she kind of messed up. But, and then I wanted to be a linguist, because I thought that if I learned the languages of the world, because I was in school in the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, it was such a fractured society and world. I thought if I learned the languages of the world, I could help make the world better by speaking too. So, and then linguistics had all this math in it, or what looked like math, so forget that. And I also went to college at a time that most of us didn't go to class because we thought we could save the world. And And then when I left, and I thought that I was going to do something in California to do with social change, and I ended up in an acting class by fluke, but no intention to stay, no intention to stick around at all. And I thought, oh my goodness, everyone's changing. So, you know, rather than go back out into San Francisco and try to find a revolution, maybe I should just stay here. It's kind of nice and watch everyone change. Maybe I'll learn something.
So it really wasn't a kind of orchestrated, you know, from day one.
No.
The theater was.
No.
Oh, that's fascinating, because it seems such a, as always, you know, in hindsight, but it seems such a perfect match for the, you know, the idea that real life is best represented by, you know, a real connection in terms of the interviews you've done presented as theater.
No, and I wasn't even smitten. You know, I mean, I was sort of more, you know, it's again that question that kept me going, not the theater itself. I remember my acting school, while learning Shakespeare, Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, who was a black congresswoman from Texas, spoke at the hearings about the impeachment of Richard Nixon. And her language was so incredible, rhetorically, what she said, how she said it, that I was more interested in her as a heroic actor than anybody. And I went to a great school, American Conservatory Theater. There were 50 actors. I mean, this was an amazing time to be studying theater in the company. And I could go and watch every night. No one grabbed me like Barbara Jordan. I mean, of course, the African-American people in the company, only 2 of them played maids. That probably had something to do with it too. And pizza people, pizza boys. But I thought, this is a heroic, classical human being. Yeah. And if I could learn to speak like that, it'd be phenomenal, right? So I think I was always interested and engaged with what was going on outside of that conservatory environment, and that was motivating me to go forward to try to learn more about this magical vehicle, a word.
And just staying on the subject of words for a second longer, there's a quote that you said that has always stayed with me, which is the idea that there's a huge difference between what somebody is saying versus what they're trying to say. And that, for me, again, shifted how I encounter not only dramatic literature, but also just human interaction. Is there anything that you could speak to in relation to that somehow sheds light on how you approach these interviews with people, or how you select the material that manifests in your pieces?
Well, I try to wait. I don't talk a whole lot. And I try to wait for people to do what I call it when they start singing. And that's when I'm, know that the work that it's getting to be interesting, that their language starts to have odd rhythms and forms. And I need that. I need them to do that.
So that it leaves the kind of interview tonality in a way.
Well, I think so if you were doing me, what I just did would be interesting.
Right. Right.
I think
right. The human, yes.
where I stopped talking.
Right.
I didn't have any words. I'm not smart.
Right. And I mean, it's interesting because I feel like in lesser hands, when one interviews someone, there's a kind of framing in which the person then begins, like you're saying, perhaps before the singing, even pitch-wise, you can hear a person struggling to answer, and they, as I always tell my students, they up-pitch and have these whole, they're kind of trying to sound smart and sound right, and I feel like there's a humanness to the language that you extract, seems like not the right word, but that you're able to engage people in. And you're right, the tonality and the manifestation becomes a conversation and not an interview. And so that to me is always such a great mystery as to how that is elicited from someone, how you are able to leave in a way, the awareness that there's an interview, that there's a viewer in a way, or a witness to their work. This question, I guess, leads to a bigger subject, which is this idea of truth in your work. And again, in the pieces that I've seen, and also having seen you perform excerpts, there's such truth, and not only because the source is, of course, a living human being, but there's such truth to or even the orchestration of how you put a piece together. I was wondering if you could speak to that subject, if that's a word that enters your process in particular junctures, or
Which word?
truth.
Well, I think in what we do, you and I, we are creating fictions to release truths. So the difference between me and you and a journalist is a journalist is after the fact of the truth.
Right.
And Johnny Cochran told me about the courtroom that there's 3 sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. And so I guess it's really about, I don't know if it's about truth. I mean, I think truth is essential, but I don't know if it's the pursuit of truth. It is the pursuit of understanding. And, you know, for my play, the most recent play, Let Me Down Easy, I did over 300 interviews on 3 continents. And so for me to take someone and then put them in the play and go through the process of creating a quote-unquote character is an enormous amount of work. And I realize that I'm usually picking people who understand something that I don't. And every time I speak the magical words that they have spoken to me, it's a divine opportunity. It is a treasured moment when I try my best, each time I say the words, to understand what they're teaching me, as I really want to know it. They know it, and I know they know it, and I want to know it. So the only way I know to know it is to put myself in their words, the way you would think of putting yourself in somebody's shoes. But it's less about truth in that way of a fact, and more about wanting to experience the magic and the sanctity of their universe. So in that way, even if it's in the case of a woman I interviewed in the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women who allowed her boyfriend to kill her daughter, I don't know if she told me the whole truth, but it is a dynamic experience to enter her world through her words. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And don't you think that's what theater is?
Yeah, agreed.
That,
I mean,
that we are entering this other world, and we are like children, able to believe we're in it.
Right.
But I don't know if it's not telling the truth, but we're in there because we believe we are finding out something about our plight as living beings.
I love the notion of releasing truth, of entering into that fictional conversation in order to release truth. On the subject of your last piece, Anna's last piece opened and ran in New York City to fantastic reviews and responses from the audience. The piece dealt with many things, but it seems so, after seeing it, Anna, it seems so unfair to describe it in simple words, but for a shorthand, the piece dealt with ideas of loss, of health, of the human body, and healthcare really became a big a big flag in a way that people put on the piece, though again it was speaking on many levels. In witnessing the piece, Anna went from being a cowboy to a Buddhist monk to Lance Armstrong to a Texas governor, and it was a really remarkable conversation to have with the stage. One of my questions to you is, as the piece I believe opened in was it October, November in New York, and it ran September, and it ran quite an extended amount of time. And during that time in the United States, there was a lot of conversation and controversy over the subject of healthcare. And I'm wondering if you saw a change in the audience from week to week as that conversation was developing in the United States, or in the reactions or the characters that stood out or language that stood out. Because truly, just trying to keep track of that in the United States was such a schizophrenic experience from week to week. And I kept thinking, I wonder what the experience is of actually witnessing a reactive audience, which the night that I was there, the audience was very reactive and engaged. So I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because that's the other thing about this, the way we work, you and I, of organizing these fictions. So my words that I use are words that people really said. But over time, Let Me Down Easy took a certain form, and it too became a known world. It becomes like a person. And in the summertime, when people started taking guns into town meetings about health care, oh my goodness, so of course I got on a plane. But without thinking, I can't even believe it. I was sort of like, man, they got guns in the town meetings, I better go to one. I was sort of on my way to Montana. I thought, they have guns in town meetings. Now, why am I going to that, right? And so I went out to Montana, because Obama was going to be there, and went to Colorado, and I started talking to the Tea Party people. And I came back, and I tried to adjust the play, and I went down to Washington and talked to Henry Waxman and Zeke Emanuel and so forth, and other people. And, I even did the show some nights in previews with those people who were bringing us up to date, but I ended up not using it. And I think it's because the play had already become something else. And then somebody asked me today, a young woman asked me today about what I want people to take, or we could even think about that now, what do I want you to take from this? I think about what people were bringing, right? So I think that the people who came were bringing all of the information that they were reading in the news and all of their thoughts about it. And then I was hoping that what I was offering would mix in with all of that journalism, all that current event, to make another kind of meaning for them, that we would each night be making some meaning together. So that, it's like they're the other part of the band.
Right. Again, to the metaphor of almost jazz, of creating this improvisatory piece that then solidifies. I have to, in hearing you say that you heard that there were people toting guns, and you said, I'm going to go there.
Without thinking what that meant. I'm not brave really like that.
Well, I love that surprises you. I just want to frame that, at least in what little I know about your process in previous pieces, that the notion of there being, in an area of New York called Crown Heights, this humongous, one of the largest race riots, I think, that had existed in New York, and and you headed into that conversation. I feel like in LA, the similar scenario where there had been an acquittal of a series or a group of police that had essentially taken great violence on an African American male in the west coast of the United States, and again, you jumped right into that. I find that to be such a courageous thing, particularly someone who, as fellow theater makers, an art form whose relevance is, I believe, our responsibility to constantly prove and reprove the relevance of the theater. And so when I hear, the minute that I hear a piece that you're working on, I think, of course she's going to head right into the storm of it and,
But you know
try
what's
to figure
interesting
out.
about L.A. is that one of my muses, and I named the play, it was a gang member, I named the play after him, Twilight. And the person who took me around was a lot like Iman, who's, I feel like I've known her for years, and we only spent 2 days together. She's a really amazing young woman, really, really, really amazing young woman who works in the offices over on campus and from Pakistan, and was mother from Venezuela, and father from Pakistan, and graduated from NYU. But I had a driver, young driver, quite like her, even younger than Iman, in LA, Keisha. Braces, big smile, always ready to go. Just me and her driving around in South Central, which was like this violent area.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think, there was some kind of other kind of protection going on, because we'd arrive and we'd be like, where's the gym? Some guy would come over, sis, you can't, let me walk you to that gym, okay? I mean, you cannot walk around here.
Wow.
So, and then the interesting thing is, when the play was in LA, there were a couple of fashion magazines that did features on me. And where did they want to go? By the way, I mean, I did interviews in Beverly Hills, Hollywood, conservative Simi Valley, Brentwood, Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. They wanted to take me to South Central, this scary area. And they had police escorts. They had police escorts taking me and the photographer down there. And I'm thinking, wow, Vogue and Harper's Bazaar had police escorts to do a photo shoot. Cops all around.
To go into that
the
area.
whole time they would take, yep.
Yeah, but you and Keisha
Me
went
and
into
Keisha.
that area.
But again, I wasn't thinking. I wouldn't do that now.
Yeah.
And when I went to South Africa and Rwanda and Uganda, and we went to the north of Uganda, very scary. State Department said, don't go. I mean, we didn't. I don't go into foreign countries without people who know the country with me. I'm not foolish like that. I won't go walking around a township in South Africa unless I know that the people know where I'm going.
And Anna, how does, I understand how the work certainly affects, or I can at least personally experience the work and how it affects me as an audience. I know students of yours who have been affected by the work. I always wonder how it affects you personally.
Yeah.
How the human beings that go, that goes home at night and she makes dinner, and how actually listening and engaging that emotionally, what effect it has. I mean, is it something that becomes inspiring? Is it something that depending on the subject matter can be wearing? Is it, what does it actually leave in you?
Well, first of all, I'm trained, like I met this wonderful doctor years and years ago, cancer surgeon, pediatric cancer surgeon, and I asked him about, why cancer, and, I thought he would say, I want to save lives, which was part of it. Mm-hmm. But the other part of it was he got to do, quote unquote, bigger operations. And so I want to feel. I mean, I'm trained to feel. I want to feel. I want to feel everything. I want to feel extreme joy. I want to feel profound despair. I want to feel loss. That's what my instrument was designed to do. So I want to do that. That's number one. Number two, it usually hits in very you can't expect it. You don't know what's going to happen. And I alluded to the woman, I don't know why I'm thinking about her today. I haven't thought about her in a long time, who allowed her boyfriend to kill her daughter. And this was the Maryland Correctional Institute for Women. I was living in San Francisco at the time and was finishing up some research I was doing there. And one of the young women who was incarcerated was in a very bad mood, and she was saying, you know, I got to get out of here. You know, I can't take this. You know, we got women in here who killed their own children, blah, blah. And I said to one of the guards, a sergeant, I said, you have women in here who killed their own children? She said, yeah. I said, can I talk to one? And she said, well, I don't know. Well, maybe so-and-so is ready for that. But, you know, you have to have permission from the warden. The warden was in a meeting. But somehow he came out and allowed me to talk to this woman. And I was, like, leaving the next day, so it had to happen. So all I was thinking about in the interview was I was barely, like, breathing, because I was like, you know, the car is going to be here in 45 minutes, and whatever I get, I get. Boom, I left. I went to Baltimore to have dinner with my mother. That's where I grew up. And I said, you know, this unbelievable story that I heard today about a woman who, oh my, awful, sat in her bedroom while her boyfriend was hitting her daughter, and she was hearing her daughter's head hit the tub, and the little girl died. And my mother said, oh, that was a famous story here. They even pretended that the child was missing. And blah, 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 that was in the news and so forth. Boom, I go home to San Francisco. And that night I had this dream that I had the mumps, and it was really, 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 really painful. And in the dream, you know, it's like how you feel the pain. And I went to the doctor and I said, you know, this is so painful here, and it feels like the mumps, but it couldn't be the mumps because I had the mumps when I was a child. I can't tell you how painful it is. The doctor said, well, they're back. And so in the dream, I was thinking, oh no, I probably caught him in the prison. And I'm thinking in the dream, now what did I do? Well, I had dinner with my mother. I think I didn't wash my hands before I ate. I thought, no, you went swimming. The chlorine probably took it off. I mean, and that dream was really about me catching the pain in that story.
Wow.
Here.
That's such a visceral image, right?
Yeah.
That had entered your system.
Yeah. So it hits on all these levels.
Yeah. Oh, that's, I think that giving of yourself is, at least in my opinion, what makes these voices ring so loud on a stage. That it isn't distance from you. It isn't, here's something I brought. It's actually, you have said this before, which is that the idea of wearing the words, that they're actually on your skin and on you, which is hugely exciting. With your permission, I'd love to move on to sharing some of those
All right,
words,
great,
if
sure.
that's possible. So we'll just going to transition the stage for 1 minute, and we're going to dim the lights, and Anna will share excerpts from some of the works that she's been doing.
So I want to thank John Sexton and Diane Yu for putting up with my foolishness in general. And for thinking that my foolishness has any value in the very important work that you are doing here. And thank you to Philip Kennedy for having me here. So I'm going to do something very risky now, which is that I had one plan of what I was going to present, and I changed it after the 2 days that I spent here and in Dubai. And so some of what I'm going to do is not material that I know or do, but it is material that I've collected, and I want to offer it up here because I think it is a part of the magnificence and of the magnificent opportunity that you have here living and working in Abu Dhabi. Now, the play that I just finished running in New York, Let Me Down Easy, as Rubén has suggested, is about healthcare in terms of the fact, but it's really about mortality. And beyond that, it's really about a question I had, which was, given the fact that the rumor is true, we are mortal, and given the fact that things just aren't fair, you know, things happen that just shouldn't happen to some people. And some people have advantages that Why him or why her? The meanest person may live to be 100, and someone who is precious may leave us at an early age. So I started thinking about the concept of grace. And I want to share some of that with you first before I go to some of my stock characters from Let Me Down Easy. So if you'll bear with me, and I'm going to be doing this for about 35 minutes. Hope that's okay with you. So this title, Let Me Down Easy, came to me in a dream, but I often asked people what it meant to them. And so this first person is the first speaker, really, in the play, but I've adjusted his language by going back and picking up something else that he said to me that wasn't actually in the play, but I'm going to be using it here to try to have this animate the Q&A we do together. So this is Let Me Down Easy. Now, everything you're going to hear is word for word. My grandfather said when I was a child, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. If you say a word often enough, it becomes you. That's part of what that magic is. So this is Let Me Down Easy. And this is Reverend James Cone, who's a theologian. Y'all all heard about black liberation theology with Jeremiah Wright and Senator Obama, now president. And actually, James Cone was one of the first black liberation theologists. And so this is his answer to my question about Let Me Down Easy, and then you'll see where we head with that. Let me down easy. Those are words of broken heart. They can be interpreted as broken love. I certainly heard it in that context. Let me down easy. Don't do it too harshly, not too mean. Let it be easy. But as most people realize, most of that black love songs and blues and jazz is a transmutation of about injustice too. But it's covert, not overt. And it's a combination of talking about love and at the same time talking about hurt from broken love, broken heartedness, and at the same time talking about hurt from what's happening to you in society. But it's certainly about love when I think about it. Grace. Yes. The word means a great deal to me. Grace. It's one of the first words I heard when I was in church. First, the song, Amazing Grace. I heard that. My mother and the other people of Macedonia AME Church in Bearden, Arkansas, sang about it. And they also preached about it. And grace was understood as that power that enable you to overcome very difficult circumstances. So, grace is something that comes from God. It's a mystery. I think grace is God's love that comes to people in situations of distress. People need something to sustain them in times of difficulty. Whether that's personal, whether that's social, they need, that's something within that you can't always explain. That's something within you that is a kind of affirmation of you. And it enables you to know who you are and be at ease with who you are, at peace with who you are, no matter what's happening around you and no matter what you're going to face. James Cone. Did anyone go to Harvard? So if you went to Harvard any time recently, I guess, I don't know, last 30, 40, probably 40 years, Peter Gomes, who was a professor of religion and the reverend of Memorial Church at Harvard, was the first person you would meet when you came and the last. And so I asked him, of course, about grace. What is grace? Well, that's no small question. That is what John Newton called in his famous hymn, Amazing Grace. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary sort of thing. Newton was an English slaver and had religious experience that convinced him that human slavery was wrong and that he should get out of that business in which he'd made a vast fortune. And so the text, which we all know, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, describes this moment of transformation when he realized that how he was not how he wanted to be or how he was meant to be. So it became an act of will for him to get out of the slave trade and become a Christian evangelist, which he did. Now, here is a story of a white man who was redeemed from his pernicious life in the slave trade. So when he says, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, he was a wretch. It's a terrible thing to do. Now, slaves are not virtuous by definition of being slaves. They too have things for which they must repent and for which they're sorry. But most of us don't spend a great deal of time thinking about that. I've had many students at Harvard Business School, for example, say to me, you know, I would love to be a good Christian in my business dealings, but I would suffer. I'd lose. Because what counts in business is success. And my fellow business dealers wouldn't behave in this way. I can't practice the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If I practice the golden rule, they do me in. I hear this all the time. Some kids say, I can't afford to be nice. I can't afford to be decent. Because that is the impression of what the world requires. And when I get more of the world's goods, and I'm more secure, and I'm running things, then I'll be good. I want to be well. I want to do well, then I'll be good. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. More often than not, they're never doing well enough to be good. I hear that from professional schools all the time. I say, well, it's a tragic way to go through life. You're going to live a life of quiet desperation. Now, business people understand risk. So I say, well, why don't you risk this? Might even be good for business. Say, it might even be good for business. People discover you're a nice person, want to do business with you. Whoa, maybe so, they say. I mean, there are openings, there are glimmers of this, but that's the context, I'm afraid. So grace is not simply being able to get over the rough spots or the tough times. You have a share in the fallen nature of the human enterprise, no matter what your condition in this life is. So with grace, you get a glimpse. It's not a photograph, it's a glimpse of what you might be like if you always acted as if God were sort of working through you or with you, or you were part of God's plan and design. So a grace-filled moment for me is a moment when I can really be what I think God wants me to be, which is different from what I may be, or what I'm compelled to do, or what I think I ought to do. Peter Gomes. And so my quest for grace continued when I met this man. When I went to hear the Dalai Lama speak. I talked to his French translator, who's a Buddhist monk, Mathieu Ricard, who has been studied. They studied his brain waves, and he's apparently the happiest man in the world. And this is called loving kindness. So we hear what Peter Gomes just had to say. Grace? we don't have anything like that. We don't have any gods. It's a very different approach. In fact, Buddhism speaks about original goodness. Like how our deep nature is like a nugget of gold. And gold can fall into a garbage heap, a heap of garbage. But even in a heap of garbage, gold is still gold. You just need to pick it up and wash it and make it shine. I have a friend who's a very well-known French psychologist, a psychiatrist, and he had to hide. He wrote also a book on happiness, and he had to hide from his colleagues because when he said, his name is Christophe André, it's a very beautiful book, it's called The Psychology of Happiness, and he had to hide. When he started saying that, his colleagues said, what do you mean? You're not writing a book on happiness. What was that? What was that? Like, a great scientist writing a book, I don't know, a book on astrology or something for happiness. They think it's really naive and silly. It's like kids sort of looking for lollipops or something. But they just don't understand what's meant by happiness. We have a prayer that everybody says often, even walking or traveling. It's may all beings find the root of happiness and the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings who have happiness may not be separated from it. May it increase, and that's I'm trying to think of the Tibetan word. May I be free from partiality and consider all of them the same way, whether they are friends, neutrals, or enemies. So may I extend that loving kindness, compassion, and rejoicing to all beings. Mathieu Ricard. Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf. Latif. I've learned to know that different languages look at reality differently. It's like the old saying that the Eskimos don't have a word for snow, but they have words for like winter snow, spring snow, overnight snow, fresh snow. What does love mean? I love my parents. I love my daughter. I love my wife. I love my friends. I love my car. I love mathematics. I love lamb chops. When you say I love my wife, I love her company, to embrace her, make love to her. I say I love lamb chops. It means I like to take an animal, slaughter it, slice it up, grill its ribs, and eat it. The challenge of language. The challenge that you are now going through in trying to get the understanding of the term of grace. A priest, a Buddhist monk, and now an imam. I believe that the way the Christians use the word grace
it is used in the sense of a special intervention by God into human affairs. That phenomenon is recognized in Islam. There's a word that's translated, which I translate as grace, which is lutf. That's the noun. And latif and yalatif is the attribute itself. Somebody who is latif means graceful, subtle, fine, delicate, nuanced. You might say, okay, the graces of life, a graceful meal. Now, but it is used by Muslims also. You say, oh, the one who prevents a tragedy from happening. The methodology of how to call people to prayer. That was an act of grace. Isn't the call to prayer magical? You know the story of how it happened. When the Prophet, after 13 years, fled Mecca because of an assassination attempt on his life, you know, he was inspired to leave Mecca with all of his followers for Medina. And when they went there, he built the first mosque to pray, for prayer. And they decide, how shall we call the people to prayer? We can't use a horn because the Jews use a horn. There were some Jewish tribes, there in Medina. We can't use a bell because the Christians use a bell. How do we call the people to prayer? Some narratives have that the Prophet commissioned a guy to do some kind of a gong with a different sound. A few days later, or while the gong was not completely manufactured, one of the companions came to the Prophet and said, I have seen a dream in which this man came, and this is how you call people to prayer. God is most great. I bear witness that there is no God but God. This is the English meaning of the Arabic. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Come to prayer. Come to success. God is most great. There is no God but God. And the Prophet said, this is an instruction to us. And he asked Bilal, who was an Abyssinian slave from Ethiopia, and his master whipped him and subjected him to immense suffering. His name was Bilal, who was the first African to become a Muslim. He accepted Islam in Mecca. And like even for today, the Africans are known for their musical voices, their rhythm and blues and their soul and stuff like that. He had a beautiful soul, So the Prophet said, Bilal, climb to the roof and call the people to prayer and make this call. People heard it, Anna, for the first time, and they froze. Said, what's that? They freaked out. They froze. Can you imagine what it's like to hear it for the first time? To be in the companionship of the Prophet and wondering how to call the people. And Bilal. The story is very beautiful. When the Prophet died, Bilal went up, as usual, to call the prayer. And he began. God is most great. Muhammad. He couldn't say it. He broke down. I bear witness that Muhammad is a messenger of God. He couldn't. He started to say, Mohammed. He stopped. He couldn't utter the sound of the word. He said, I'm sorry. I can't do the call to prayer. He stopped calling the prayer since that time. And then a few years later, he went to Damascus, to Syria. Many, many years later, he visited Medina. And the companion said, for old time's sake, please, go up and call the prayer. So he went, and he called the prayer once. And the story says that the companions broke down in tears and cried. They wet their beards with their tears. Their beards got wet from weeping. What makes me alive is a life force within me, okay? Once that soul leaves, we're dead, okay? And I believe that Bilal's ability to do the call to prayer was sustained by that there's a spiritual life force. And when Muhammad died, when all of a sudden it died, it's a shock to the system. It says, I can't do this anymore. So it was an act of grace. The call, because it's an intervention of the divine. The methodology of how to call people to prayer, but it's an act of grace. The fact that the prophet was taught by his followers, an act of grace. The fact that the call to prayer has such a compelling power to anybody who hears it is an act of grace. It calls you, it calls your soul. It's that call of the wild? What do you call it? The call of the wild. What's the call of the wild? It's a sound that your soul perks up and says, what's that? It's resonating, okay? That's grace. That's God calling. Imam Faisal Ralph. And so to end this section, it sounds like a joke, right? This minister, a priest, a Buddhist monk, and a imam walk into a bar. So I'm just going to finish it off with a rabbi. And by then you should know enough about grace to hear the rest of what I have to say. So this rabbi is a famous rabbi in L.A., Rabbi David Wolpe. I don't have a cold. My nose runs when I talk to important people. No, it's true. A doctor told me about a drug I could take, but I forgot the name of it when she heard me speak. So this is Rabbi David Wolpe. The problem is that we're working in English. And English words have such Christian resonance because, it's a Christian language. So if by grace you mean God's mercy or God's love, those are closer to what Judaism expresses. That's closer than God's grace. Civilization is very thin. And I don't believe that the Germans are any worse as a people than the Poles or the Americans or the Ukrainians or the Canadians or anyone else. I really believe that a cruel ideology and desperation and thoughtlessness can push anyone, any group of people, to cruelty. I don't believe that human beings are essentially good. Buber says, I, thou is a compound word. It's always I hyphen thou. Because when you're fully in relationship, you're not sure where you end and the other person starts. In order to relate to someone or to something else, I think you have to have a piece of what they are in you. I mean, sort of the great hope for the world, if there isn't something of us in the other. It's never you. But if you can't for a moment feel like it's you, then you've lived in vain. If there aren't these seconds when selves merge that really, why are you here? Why are you here? The only whole heart is a broken one. The only whole heart is a broken one. It's the kind of cracked that lets light in. Never again. Someone said that never again means never again will we let Nazis kill Jews in Europe in the 1940s. Meaning that never again is a slogan that is used to recall the Holocaust, but it has not prevented genocide since the Holocaust. Because if you think about Rwanda and Cambodia and Bosnia, I mean, it's just, the truth is we say never again, but it doesn't seem to govern human behavior. If I were a sociologist or a politician, I might talk about social structures. But since I'm a rabbi, I really think that the line between good and evil runs inside of every human being. So without, human beings really rededicating themselves to goodness, which may be a result of realizing that for the first time, we can really destroy all of us. The old parable about the rabbis tell this story about the person who said, I'm only making a hole in my side of the boat. The truth is, that's the way the world is now. There is no such thing anymore as a local conflict, and every local conflict threatens to engulf us all. In some ways, that may be, in some ways, our best hope. The recognition we really are in it together in a way that was never in the Noah story, which is the one story of God destroying the world. At the end of the story, God shows this rainbow. And he says, I promise never to destroy the world again. And there's this chilling omission because he doesn't say, you'll never destroy the world again. He says, I won't. Rabbi David Volpe. So, my 2 days here have made me think about the potential of this project, of this university, in this city, and this city, where it sits in the world, and so many different kinds of humans here. The project could be a project that's about nothing less than human understanding. And so I wish you the best with it. So these are just some of my favorite all-time people that I want to give you now. And they too, no, lights are still out, sorry about that. If I could keep the lights out. These are the healthcare people, and I think that this theme of grace is what can dominate that discussion. They took them away, but I had some marks. I guess in the effort to keep this is just a prop.
Right here.
Okay. So this is Brent Williams. I told you I thought I'd be talking to rodeo people and stuff, and eventually I did. So this is Brent Williams, who is a cowboy. I got hung up by a bull. Wasn't a mean bull. Bull stepped on my back in the rodeo. When I landed on my side, he stepped on the left side, 2 back feet, broke 4 ribs, L2, L3, and there's a doctor sitting in the front row. He came back, he said, kid, you got to go to the hospital. I think you may have ruptured your spleen, your kidney or something. I said, no, I'm all right. Just broke some ribs. He said, no, I'm serious. I'm a urologist from a military hospital. You got to get that checked out. And he got on the phone, the civilian, you can't go to the military hospital, that's a life or death situation. He told me it's a life or death situation. I was kind of laughing. I didn't believe him. And then they took me to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, made me do it in a cup. And I just did straight red. I have to clean it up. I just did cowboys. They usually talk in a very illustrative way, but I'm going to take it away. Made me do it in a cup. And I did it in a cup and just did straight red blood. So then they said it's going to take out my left kidney. I begged them. I said, look, I'm going to ride bulls. If I got just one kidney, I'd just soon have two kidneys in one. So they tried a new deal. They put a stent in there, and they saved half my kidney. So, I got 1.5 kidney instead of one. And them doctors, they get paid a flat rate. I mean, they're not trying to take advantage of me and make more money like, for their Mercedes-Benz or whatever they got. I think them doctors probably don't even drive them fancy sports cars like the other doctors do. It cost me $1,200, flat rate, and didn't change. When I was, they did a CAT scan, whatever they did to me didn't change, and I was in the ICU for 6 days, didn't change. I didn't get no doctor's bills or nothing. It cost me $1,200, flat rate. And I didn't get no doctor's bills or nothing. Everybody pays flat rate. Doesn't matter what it is. And personally, I feel like we need to go to a deal like that. And I think I had better doctors there. Doctors really want to be doctors, not these idiots these days just take all your money, go to college, spend all their parents' money going to college, come out and make a killing, don't really care. You tell me a poor doctor and I'll... Anyway. Very grateful for them doctors. And them doctors, they told me I felt like if I'd gone to any other hospital in San Antonio, they would take my kidney out. And, I got insurance, Blue Cross of Idaho. Cost me $260 a month. Then we got a $7,500 deductible, paying all that money. We got a $7,500 deductible. We don't ever meet that. They're just trying to take us. Just like all the people that got the money to take the poor. Then they take the middle class till the middle class becomes poor. And then they're going to start taking the rich, and they're going to break the country, I think. But basically, I'm an optimist. That's what I like to say. I'm an optimist because, when you're riding a bull, you do good. It's just like you feel like this is what life should be like. Feel like it, ain't nothing in the world that could beat you up or nothing like that because so much power in it. I mean, because when you think about it, we shouldn't be able to stay on top of a bull that's trying to buck you off because we weigh like, 150 pounds. Bull weighs like, over 2,000 pounds. And the way I think you stay on top of that bucking bull is something inside of you, determination. Well, I don't want to think about when I'm not rodeoing no more. No, I don't want to think. Well, I mean, I'll be all right. Have my ranch, my cows and everything, but I don't want to think about when that day comes. Guess just going to be like a big old empty space inside of me. Probably a bigger old empty space than when my brother died. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be like when I'm not rodeoing for sure. I don't know, but I guess just going to be like the day my brother died. Toughness. Well, we was in West Jordan, Utah. This bull shoved my face right through the middle. Shoots, tore my face all up, and I had to go to the hospital. Buddies took me to the hospital, spent 5 hours sewing up my face. And then next day, they was going to straighten out my nose. And they had a rodeo that night, so I didn't want them to put me under anesthesia, or however you say that word. I told them to do without it. And when they straighten out your nose, you take these 2 metal rods, shove them up your nose, work their way up, and felt like it was going out through my brains out the top of my head. Everybody said it should have killed me. They didn't even knock me out. But I have a high tolerance for pain. So I guess that would be toughness. But good thing about it was, once it straightened out my nose, I could breathe. And I couldn't breathe since I broke my nose in the high school rodeo. That's Brent Williams. So I just have 3 more. This is Grace in Motion. This is, did you all hear about the hurricane that happened in New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina? So I went there, and this is a young woman who I met, a doctor, white American doctor. And even though we have an African-American president, we still are obsessed with race in America. And so this is a young woman who went to Barnard, then went down to work in a public hospital, charity hospital. There's people say it's the first hospital for poor people in America. Some people say Bellevue is the first one, so there's a debate about that. But nonetheless, I met her, and this is called a heavy sense of resignation. I mean, you know, people come into Charity Hospital with their own racism and their own classism, where I always thought that we had a tremendous opportunity in some sense to see what it would be like without living it, to be poor, and to open up our heart and our mind to these fantastic people coming into the hospital. But some of the people are just like, you know, I can't wait to get out of here, this freaking hospital, blah, blah, blah. And they treating the people with disdain. Whereas one of the things I loved so much about working in Charity Hospital, a public hospital, is that every single patient who comes through that door has gotten the bad end of the stick in life, period. And through my interactions with them, I could treat them like they were the Saudi Arabian princess coming to the Mayo Clinic. But that got kind of difficult when things started to deteriorate around here during Hurricane Katrina. I mean, there's no reason why I can't give everybody top-line best medical care. But that deteriorated when things fell apart here around Katrina, and that whole facade, that whole veneer that you could take care of poor people and you could take care of them as well as you could take care of rich people, that all just fell. Those walls came down. One of my patients said to me he had already heard through family members that he had lost his grandmother and his aunt. He's from the 9th Ward, family had gotten out, but he'd already heard through family members that he'd lost his grandmother and his aunt. I mean, the water came up 10 feet an hour in their house. And so he was just really grieving. Pretty young guy, like in his 40s, had a spinal cord injury. So he was pretty immobile, like most of my patients, very immobile. And I just went in, and he was just laying there. And by now, it's like 106 degrees. There are no lights. We are reduced to feeding people very small portions. And I had tried to keep a stiff upper lip in the beginning, you know, kind of cheery outlook with my patients, you know, hey, we're going to get out of here. Don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah. But I think we're all just so exhausted. And so I just went in, and he was just laying there, and he said to me, he said, Dr. K, have the patients in the private hospitals gotten out? I said, you know what? They have. He said, you think we're going to get out today? And this is already going on 5 days. And I said, well, I look outside. I see the sun is setting. Now, they made a lot of promises about coming, but I see the sun is setting, and I don't know, we may be here another night. I said, I don't know, I think we better be prepared for that. I said, I know we may be here more than one night. And he said, well, do you think they're eventually going to come for us? I said, I don't know. I said, I just don't know. And that made me feel so crappy and like ashamed a little bit, like ashamed not to be able to do for people what I wanted to do, which was to get them out of here into a safe place. I mean, my patients at Charity, they're not dumb. The nurses at Charity, they're not dumb. They knew we were going to be the last ones out. They knew that the patients in the private hospitals had private helicopters. And I mean, it wasn't a shock to anybody. And you just see the desperation of being poor in this country, and in some ways the distrust. I mean, the deep down, this is not the first time that this has happened to people. I'm privileged. This is the first time I have ever been totally abandoned by my government. But it's not the first time for my patients or the nurses or the other people who work in Charity Hospital. And I have a lot of history with the nurses on the floor. A lot of them know me since I'm a medical student, and 100% of the nurses on the floor are African American. And the African American nurses and the other people who work at Charity said two things to me early on. They said, one, they opened the levees on us, meaning they had flooded the poor areas of Orleans Parish to spare the other parts. And two, they said to me early on, they're not going to come and get us. And here I am coming from my privileged position. What do you mean they're not going to come and get us? Of course they're going to come and get us. FEMA knew we were here. We were in constant contact with FEMA. But my patients really did sense. And that part made me ashamed. And I thought, you know what? It must be like this your whole life. Just that feeling that we have to do for ourselves because nobody's going to come and get us. Just that feeling of being abandoned. That was all new for me. Being abandoned, that was all new for me. But for my patients and the people who work at Charity, it was just one more thing. And they just went about their business. Every nurse on that floor worked for 6 days in that heat with no power, with flashlights. They never missed a vital sign. They never missed a urine output. They never missed a trick. And with a heavy sense of resignation. So that whole that I had always tried, hey, you're here at charity, but don't worry about it. We're going to give you the best possible care. You know what? We are going to give you the best possible care, but we can't make the government or FEMA come and get us. Kirsten Kurtzberg. Any expats from Texas, that other country next to the United States? Anybody? So Governor Ann Richards is a famous American. This is called Cheap. Let's talk about something else, Anna, that I think is really important to say to you. I have two choices every day when I get up. I can feel good or I can feel bad. And a whole lot of what I feel is in my brain. So if I say to myself, this is going to be a great day, then it's a better day. But if I say, I am not going to buy into a sickness life. So when I get up in the morning, I say to myself, this is going to be a great day. And even when it isn't, it's better. Because I am conscious that what I think has a whole lot to do with how I feel. Want some bread? No, I was not the first woman governor of Texas. Well, in the 20s, there was Pa Ferguson who was governor. Pa was married to Ma. And Pa died. And Ma became governor. Now, she was the one, when asked about bilingual education, who said if the English language is good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for everybody. Dr. Cox told me I'm the first person in the world with esophageal cancer to have this combination of proton therapy and chemotherapy at the same time. My daughter, Ellen, has managed this whole thing for me. So I don't have to use up my chi doing that. Well, that's what it is. That's your life force. That's your light. And you have to have every ounce of it to fight this physical thing that you have. I go to this woman, and she does what's called energy work with me. Isn't it wonderful? I remember telling her I was having a hell of a day. A guy came up, just had to see me that day. Oh, just a friend. But he needed some advice, and it couldn't wait. And then, too, there is something about being indomitable. Anyway, he was there. Then he left. Then another guy came. He was there. Then I had to drive all the hell the way in the north of town to do something. By the time I got to her, I was really whipped. And she said, Ann, you are using up your chi. You're giving it to all these other people. You have to save your chi. That's your mantra from now on. Tonight's an exception. I'm giving you, it's second nature mine to give all I've got. But I can't do that now. I just can't. I can't. But I've been good. People call me up. I say, I can't talk to you right now. You're using up my chi. They put me on a regimen. I can't shake hands. I can't hug people. I can't do all the things I did to be governor. I just can't do it. And I made an exception to you tonight. I just say to people, I'm so sorry I can't shake your hand. I'm on chemotherapy. People get too close, step back. I would love for you to meet my oncologist. Her name is Dr. Fan. She's Vietnamese. I said, well, Dr. Fan, you have children? She said, no, I'm married to this hospital. You're my girl. What could be better than that? And when you see her, too, you go, you know she's married to the hospital. They assigned her to me. I think they kind of handpick the patients and the doctors who'll work best together. I don't think I have any Republicans on my team. That's Ann Richards. And let me just finish with, I told you we started with definitions of grace from 3 different religions. And this, in the end, the religions can only guide us to our actions. And this woman, I told you I traveled 3 continents. This woman is the exemplification of grace. The Sheikh Mohammed scholars met her in January through me. And she is in Johannesburg, South Africa. She runs an orphanage for children who have AIDS. It's the only one of its kind, and all their parents died of AIDS. And this is Trudy Howe. And this is called Don't Leave Them in the Dark. And I think that's really what you're all about, is bringing people into the light in your support of this project, in your belief in education. Last year, we had 4 or 5 babies, children, who passed away. And this year, we've had 1 so far. Well, what happens is they phone me any time of the night and say, this little kid is very, very sick, and I'll sit with the child until the child passes away. So I make sure that I'm there for every child, or where they don't know death. That's how I see it. They don't know that they're dying. They just know that they're very sick type of thing. And the older children that we've got here, the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old that we've got here, I sit and I talk with them the whole time about death. And we had 1 child here, Nomza. Charlene Hunter-Gold of CNN knew Nomza very, very well. And I sat with Nomza for days and hours and telling about the virus and telling about death. And Nomza knew that she was not going to make the weekend. And so she came to see me on the Friday afternoon, and she said that her mother had visited her the night before. Now, I knew that Nomza's mother had passed away 6 years prior to that, so I sat her down. And I said, now, what time did your mother visit you? She said, no, it was late at night. I said, well, if your mother visits you tonight again, if you see your mother tonight again, you must tell her that I said thank you very, very much, that I could look after you for so long. And she said, no, she will. And the next morning, the Saturday morning, I came in here, and Nomza was sitting on the stair. And she said that her mother had visited her the night again, and that her mother said, she must pack all her clothes, that she's coming to fetch her, that she's going home. And I promised you it was. And I walked up to her and I said, did you tell your mother that I said thank you very much? And she said, yes. And my mom said, thank you very much. And I had gone into her room. All her clothes were packed, put in plastic bags. And it was waiting for her. That Sunday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, Nomza passed away. And I made sure that I buried her next to her mummy. So her mother came and fetched her. And she knew she was going to die. And it's not a bad thing. She was prepared. She was prepared to go. All her stuff was packed. All her teddy bears were packed. And I took everything, her clothes, her teddy bears, and we put it in her coffin. She went very happily. Oh, well, I just tell them that there are different stages of life. I said, you get born, and sometimes when you're born, you're sick. I said, you got this germ in your body. We talk about the germ. We sit on the carpet and we play with the dolls. We play. I say, look at this ugly germ that's got into the body. And it's making this little child very sick. And sometimes this child has had enough. You know they're getting sicker. You know it's getting to the next stage. And they ask questions like, what happens when I'm dead? I say, nobody can answer that. And they ask about God. And they ask about, can we come back and visit you when we died? You know, that type of thing. They always just want to say, can we come back and visit you when we're dead? You know, that type of thing. And I just tell them, I just say, you always in my heart. Even if you've passed away, you always in my heart. You always with me, you know. So, in any case, don't leave them in the dark. Don't leave them in the dark. That's Trudy Howell, and that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Biltaggi. I'm from San Francisco. And I wanted to ask you, I know you must be thinking a lot, but what do you think about when you're not thinking?
Oh. Well, I guess maybe the question, what do you do if you don't, well, I mean, the opposite of thinking in a way to me is music. So I like to listen to music.
That's great. There's a question over here.
Hi there, Jim Minchikowski. Anna, I was fascinated by the process you go through to get some very influential people, as well as people whose lives are less influential, but they're impacted by serious issues. But can I just concentrate on the influential people? Why do they talk to you? If they know that the representation or the verbatim account you're taking may be used in a way that they perhaps would not necessarily identify with or enjoy. Do you have a stage where you take what you're doing back to them and say, this is what I want to do with the material, or do they simply just talk to you and you move on?
Well, I mean, influential people are usually people who are used to living in public by now. And so it's interesting. Influential people are the very ones who, when I hand them release, just do like that. They make a joke like, well, signing my life away. Don't even read it. One time I interviewed Charlton Heston. And he was concerned, and he said that he wanted to see, you know, what I was going to use first. So I sent it to him. And he immediately faxed it back with corrections. And I said, well, thank you so much, Mr. Heston, for doing that. But, you know, that's not the way that I work. With the written word, I work with the spoken word. I understand you completely. I am an actor. MTV is coming over tomorrow. I will perform it for you. And he sent me a tape of him performing his corrections.
Is that true?
That is true. That is true. That is true. You gotta love him for all the effort he made.
Yeah. And do you find with non-public figures that there's a bit more hesitation or restraint, or?
No, I mean, you know, it concerns me actually. In fact, I've been teaching for 37 years, and my students, you know, doing some work that is just, you know, just traditional work. In fact, it was an exercise that Zelda Fichandler, the great Zelda Fichandler, great teacher of acting, started the regional theater movement as we know it, now retired from NYU. It was like a classic exercise of hers. And they have to now do something else, sort of studying them, so I videoed it. And they all have to sign a release when they pick up their copy of the video that says that this will not be used for any reason whatsoever, ever, other than for the purposes of this exercise, because I would be horrified if one of those things ended up on YouTube.
Sure.
And it's not that anybody necessarily has anything to hide. On the other hand, I say, you know, you don't know what you're going to do with your life. I mean, I'm shocked at how people live in public. I said, you might want to run for president.
Right.
You know, even as an artist, you know, you might need a grant from a certain foundation.
Right.
And, you know, I am appalled that we have to think about this. But this living in public it is just what everybody does. So
Yeah.
I don't think it has to do with that at all, who's known and who's not known. There have been Native American people who have not talked to me because of a profound and understandable desire to speak for themselves. And also, we talked about this to John from, I forget, was it Gulf News? Or the Nation?
The national.
You know, in certain, the national, in, you know, certain cultures, the trickster, which is a good thing, the witch doctor, was a mimic. And I think in that culture, there was a person who had that role, and it's not me. I'm not a part of their culture. Or Sister Soldier, a controversial rapper, wouldn't talk to me, and a lot of people tried to talk her into it. And then one of the people said, you know, she knows who you are. I said, you know, you really need to talk to Anna. And Sister Soldier apparently said to this woman, oh, yeah, that's the sister who wants to take my words. And I thought, wow, you really understand it.
Yeah, the power of.
Well, you understand what words are.
Yeah.
And so you keep your words.
Yeah.
Because you're at a different level. So I think it's not about fame or not fame or even necessarily an inhibition of what you're going to look like. It comes from a deeper place. And I don't talk to anybody who does not want to talk to me because I'm not a journalist. I don't have to talk to everybody. I want people to talk to me who, as one woman in, you know, Fires in the Mirror, a Hasidic woman that everybody said, how in the world did you get her to talk to me? You know, at a certain point in the interview, she said, I just want to go on television and scream to the whole world. That's the person I'm looking for. Who,
Yes.
you know, I mean, this cowboy carries the most progressive part of the play. He is the most conservative person I know, a right-wing man. And he's been in my shows. I've led an article in the New York Times with him. And he's very proud. He's very proud. Introduced me to all his friends. Wants to do the Amazing Race or whatever with me.
Yeah.
He's really, really proud of having me speak as him. So those are the people I have to find because, as you know, in the theater we need an accelerated kind of communication, like what Bilal had, right? We have to have that. So I need the people who really want to talk.
Who are there, yeah. Terrific. There's a question down here, I think.
I know it's your first trip in town here. I thought you might like to know that I drove past a storefront for 6 months until last week I noticed the sign that read, Graceful Industrial Equipment, here in Abu Dhabi.
Graceful industrial equipment. All right. Now that's something. I've heard of grace in horse racing. I've heard of grace in bull riding, but never in industrial equipment.
That's true. Yeah. There's one right behind.
My name is Young Jae. I'm originally from Korea, but I lived in San Francisco and Houston, Texas. It was very nice to hear that you talk about Barbara Jordan and Ann Richards. Both of them were my heroes. You know, doing theater is like a giving yourself away. I just wanted to know, how do you refuel yourself to become you again? After all, you know, like tonight's performance, I'm sure you're exhausted, and how do you refuel yourself?
Well, I'm always me. And the work that I'm doing is about the effort that, I mean, I could never be anybody else, it can only be me. And so at best, I am in a kind of a limbo state. As one of the great professors at NYU, actually one of the reasons, other than John's invitation, that I went to NYU was to have the opportunity to work with Richard Schechner, who invented performance studies. And he told me a story about an actress going to try to be, rehearsing Medea, and she was doing very poorly. And it was really getting dark and awful, and the director was kind of like, you're not Medea. I mean, it's just not. And, she was at her wit's end, so she wasn't herself, and she wasn't Medea. She was the not, which is a positive. And so I'm in that not stage. And there are lots of reminders that I'm me. I have to pay my bills. I have a there are all these things that remind me that I'm me. And that's it. The project is about that, in that constant awareness that this is the limitation of what I get on Earth. And my journey is about trying whenever I can to touch something that is different. But, resting in terms of just, I think the question would be I would rephrase the question to say, not how do I restore myself, but more how do I prepare to do the reach? How do I prepare for the not? And physical exercise and taking care of my voice is usually what it's all about.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I wish you could feel right after Anna finished and I came up, the energy in this space is actually athletic versus psychological. It actually feels like there's been somebody reaching and sweating and trying to climb something, rather than, Anna needs to just delve out of a psychological state. So it's interesting that the way to connect is the physical, the corporal. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yes, there's one down here. It's coming.
Hi, Mike Beckerman. Absolutely.
Oh, nice to see you. I enjoyed you so much last night, and was happy. Sorry, we had to leave early, but I was so interested in so much of what you said. Professor Beckerman, as you probably know, was on a panel about Hamlet.
Yeah, and we've been doing our long-time impressions of academics for not as well as you. But you create marvelous illusions up there, and the craft is astonishing. But I wonder, as you're putting an illusion together, as you're turning into a rodeo cowboy, how do you go through it? How much is conscious? How do you work it out? Do you hit roadblocks with some of these characters? Were there any characters that you tried to create that you just couldn't get, whether for accent or movement? And just what are some of the processes of putting together some of these rather astonishing portraits that require physicality, accent, gestures of all kinds?
Well, I study, on 3 levels. I spend a lot of time with the text, really a lot of time. In a way, the best job, I think, to have working with me is the least paid, most poorly paid job. And that's the person who teaches me my lines. And I have the opportunity, I'm really lucky, I have a wonderful, wonderful student that I taught at Stanford years ago in the 90s who still will come and work with me, Marcos Nahera. Yeah. And we just, and an actress who has worked with me, Kimber Riddle, and we just lock ourselves in a room for long periods of time. And I always start the day with that because it takes the most amount of time. And it's never right. What I'm saying is never right. And they're always correcting me. And we often have to stop and think, well, let's think about that. Why is it, what I just said, and not And that's what I'm trying to do. And we study it, utterance by utterance. It's very deep, deep work. And then I work with a brilliant, brilliant dialect coach, Amy Stoller, as in Stoller and Lieber. Her father is Stoller. and a stunning dancer, choreographer who was at Ailey for like 15 years or something, Elizabeth Rojas. And it's that constant thinking I've got it and it's not it, and the constant looking. And so again, to invest all of that in somebody means that I've already made a decision or found out that I can approach it. And this makes the work very cumbersome to do, and it really takes finding the artistic directors who understand that, who understand they have to hire those people, who understand that that's really how I spend my day. The director is only a part of the day, usually 3 to 4 hours, and the greater part is with all these people. And artistic directors who are willing to give me the space and the time to struggle with the people I'm not going to do. Because it also is that. It's going through the ones that I'm not going to be able to get. So it's embodied from the beginning. It is not an afterthought. So that makes it very, very real, more like dancing.
But if somebody says, might there be a point where you would change it to because it works better?
No. I mean, you know music, so, you know, you wouldn't change a note. So no. But also, the people who I invest in, it makes a difference that it's Or did I say But I want to ask you, what's the name of that book? It's called About Decisions that you were talking about?
Yeah, How We Decide.
I thought this was very, very, very fascinating to me, this notion that we think, maybe you could say it better as I understand, that we think that if you are feeling and being emotional that you're not thinking.
Right.
But actually there's a whole process.
Right. A lot of things that people refer to as gut decisions when they unpack them are very thoughtful, but in a different way.
Which again, somehow I feel it's a connection to the language we choose. You know, that there is an intentionality.
Or that, you know, that book may have more information that we could use in acting that we're not using because we're still dwelling on the psychological as the beginning and end of truth.
Yeah, separate the thinking. Yeah. I think we are possibly out of time. So when I started this conversation, I tried to articulate to you the many reasons why I am very excited to be on this stage. I hope that you now share those with me in seeing some of Anna's work and being in conversation with her for this amount of time. Thank you so much for your work.